In this segment, I'm going to tackle the debate ongoing about, do I email or otherwise contact the professors I'd be interested in working with at PhD and, say, counseling psychology PhD programs? Depending on who you listen to or what sources you read, some say, yes, you should reach out to the professors you'd be interested in working with for a number of various reasons. They say, number one, it's good to give them a little bit of prior information about you so that they know of you and your interest and your seriousness and your perhaps passion prior to receiving your actual application materials. And they say that this can give professors an early positive impression of you because you demonstrate initiative or responsibility or seriousness, and so perhaps this added liking of you might help you when it comes time for them to compare your application against other people's when deciding who to give offers to and who to give interviews to. And perhaps they say in contacting the professors, it gives you a chance to get additional information about whether or not they're taking on an advisee that coming year, or if their research is shifting in some important way you need to know about, or otherwise helps you learn about something important going on with that professor that may influence whether or not you may want to apply to work with them, or how you want to go about articulating your interests and strengths as an applicant when you go on to apply. So those are some of the reasons that some sources tell you, yes, go ahead and contact potential professors in advance. However, some other sources might say, here are some of the disadvantages of doing so. Number one is that they'll say many times professors are really busy, and if you email them, then that requires that they take time out of their busy schedules to email you back, and that perhaps they will find that unnecessary or perhaps irritating if they're really busy, and they might not perceive that it's necessary to have this somewhat artificial dialogue with a person, and that they would just be fine with seeing your application when it comes in. And perhaps some professors know that students are told no matter what to contact professors in advance, and so students email professors without a clear goal or objective, and so professors feel obligated to respond to these emails even though the student isn't really contacting them for any other reason than because they thought that was the right thing to do, just to kind of get the professor aware of who they are as a person. Other potential disadvantages relating to emailing a professor is you have to think of what you want to say or ask, and it can be hard to state something about yourself that won't already be covered in the application that you'll eventually submit, so it's somewhat redundant with what you'd say later anyways, or you end up asking questions that maybe don't seem like the most appropriate or pertinent questions to be asking, like, do you see your research changing at all in the next few years? And then the professor's like, what do you mean? Why are you asking me that question? That's weird. Or saying, hey, what kind of new studies you're doing, and then the professor feels obligated to describe those things, even though that's not necessary, or perhaps it's already kind of stated on their website. Or perhaps the questions would involve the person asking general questions about the nature of the program rather than something specific to the professor, and the professor may feel that, well, you should just go ahead and read the website and gather information about the program from that source or from other publicly available sources, and I'm not really the person you should be asking to describe general things about the program. So again, the potential risks that some sources say there are with contacting professors is that you may basically annoy them or make their lives more difficult. And of course, part of applying for and getting into programs is providing a good impression and letting people feel kindly and warmly towards you rather than annoying them or coming across as immature or some other unflattering characteristics. So I've kind of set the stage and I've given sort of pro and con arguments for why you may or why you may not want to contact a professor in advance. I know as a professor I have a certain preference around whether or not I'd like students to contact me and in what way I'd like them to contact me, what they would say or ask in that email. And I've also heard a variety of opinions from fellow professors. So the difficult thing is, and this is not a satisfying answer to hear, the difficult thing is there's no correct answer to this question. So let me say that again. There is no correct answer that's universal to this question because every professor has a different preference. And you might be able to ascertain what that preference is for a given professor. And I'll talk about ways you might be able to figure that out in advance. And some professors you just would have no idea. And so you're left sitting with, oh, do I contact this person or not? I don't know. I could go either way. I'm worried about making the wrong decision. What do I do? So you can easily be put in a situation like that. So here's how I would recommend going about figuring out what a given professor may prefer when it comes to should they be contacted or should they not. First of all, the number one rule is Google them. Look up their faculty profile on their school's website in whatever form that takes. And maybe they even have a professional website that's separate from their school's website. And look to see if they offer any direct advice or hints about whether they would prefer to be contacted or not to be contacted by prospective students. Because sometimes they will state directly. For example, on my website, I do encourage potential applicants who might be interested in working with me to go ahead and email me in advance. However, I also give them specific instructions for what they should talk about, what they should say in that email that I, as a professor who might want to bring them onto the program, would want to know about them. So I give some concrete guidance around that. And certain professors may themselves do that. And so if they tell you how to go about approaching them or contacting them, certainly follow their advice. If you deviate from that and you do something that they don't advise, that may not make them feel very kindly towards you, of course. So the first thing is check their website and their web pages and see if you can learn what their preference is from that. If you've looked and you can't tell, another thing that you should look at, because this can be a common question that you might ask or inquire about, is look to see if they say whether or not they're going to be taking new advisees, new mentees for the next year for entrance into the program the upcoming fall, next fall. So look to see, because sometimes professors will directly say whether they intend or not to take a student. And of course, a lot of times professors won't update their web page, so they'll still have something up referring to last year, or they won't specify what year they wrote this in, and so it can be kind of ambiguous. So if they state it directly, be sure not to email them and ask them the question they've already answered on their web page. That won't make you look so good. It make you look like you don't have good attention to detail or conscientiousness. If they don't state it on the website, then it's an open question, and you can try to find other ways of finding out whether or not they intend to be taking students next year. But for me personally, I think it is appropriate for most professors, if they don't say whether they'll be taking someone or not, to email them and in a very professionally written and concise email, directly ask. And you can do that by emailing them and doing a very brief introduction to who you are and then posing the question. So perhaps something like, hi, Dr. Hammer, my name is Tracy Morgan, and I'm very interested in the University of Kentucky program and enjoy conducting help-seeking research. And I was contemplating applying to your program. However, I wanted to check in with you first to see whether you anticipate taking an advisee for next year, period. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Tracy. So an email like that, nice and concise, brief intro to yourself and providing context for who you are and why you're emailing them, and then asking the question. And, correct grammaticalness and no text speak and an informative subject line and a signature line at the bottom of your email with your name, your current institution, your email address, stuff like that. That, I think, is a very reasonable email to send. And now again, it's possible that some professors will find that annoying, but for me, as an applicant, I would be willing to take that risk of annoying them a little bit, provided they didn't already answer the question anywhere, on their web pages or whatever. So it seems like a reasonable question to ask. And because you don't want to, if you're only interested in working with that professor at that program and you're not going to apply to the program if they're not planning on taking advisees that coming year, there's no reason to spend all that time and your money applying for that program if they're not going to be taking advisees. I mean, what a waste of everything. So I think, it's worth asking that email because that could save you a lot of resources and headache up front by posing that question. But I just want to emphasize, try and see if they've already answered that question on their web page, because then certainly emailing them, even though you could have already found the answer, that will not make you look good. So to conclude, if you are thinking about emailing a given professor to reach out and build that initial rapport, that question about, do you anticipate taking advisees next year, I think is a very appropriate question. Now, if you genuinely have other questions about the professor, and those questions have not been answered anywhere else that you can find after a thorough search, it may very well be appropriate to email the professor and pose those questions. However, it is a good idea to ask a current mentor of yours to look over the email you're thinking about sending, just so you can get some feedback about tone and conciseness and those sorts of things. Because any email that you send, again, needs to be professionally written, needs to be concise and to the point. And you don't want to ask questions that might require many lines of reply from the professor. Don't make their life difficult by asking questions that require a lengthy response to you. Be very intentional about the questions you ask. Make sure they're actually really important to you, because otherwise you shouldn't ask them. And make it easy for the professor to answer your questions in a brief manner, in a few sentences, ideally. And make sure whenever posing any questions that you always start your email off with a brief introduction to who you are and why it's relevant that you're emailing them. So by saying, I was looking over your materials and I've read your work and I'm excited about the idea of applying to your program. So you're setting this context that, hey, this is relevant. This is why I'm contacting you, because I'm someone who's serious about potentially joining your program and joining your lab. So to conclude, if you genuinely have stuff you really need to ask and it's going to be important for you to ask them, you can email them about that, assuming, again, they don't dissuade you explicitly on the website from doing so, but never ever, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, do not reach out to professors and ask them questions and introduce yourself and whatnot just for the purpose of emailing them or making them aware that you exist. I really don't think, personally, that's necessary. Because the thing is, if you submit an application that's a sound application and you have a decent curriculum vitae, you will be fairly considered along with all the other applicants. I don't think the fact that you emailed in advance will make your CV magically stronger or your personal statement that much stronger. There's no magic thing that happens when you do that. So, it's just best to put together a great application that you submit and only reach out to the professor if, number one, they on their website or some other public source of theirs tell you to do so, that that's what they want, or number two, you genuinely have something you want to ask about that's important to ask about and is worth their time to ask. And again, remember that question that can sometimes be pertinent, which is, if you can't find the info on their website, do you plan to take advisees for the next fall? If you do want to reach out, that can be a good standard question to ask. So I hope that my nuanced answer kind of makes sense and isn't too overwhelming or too tricky, but I think that's the fine line that you walk when deciding whether and how to approach a given professor. So I hope you found this little segment helpful. Again, like always, if you found this advice useful to you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel so you can stay up to date on new stuff that I post. And if there's any stuff related to counseling, psych, research, getting into graduate school, succeeding in graduate school, clinical work, whatever it is, feel free to shoot me an email and let me know what you'd love to hear. And if I hear from people that they're wanting me to address a given piece, I'd be happy to record my thoughts on that and post it up. So thanks a lot and good luck.